Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me this week while I turn this and this into this, what are essentially brass knuckles for gladiators. Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. After receiving a couple commissions in the past several weeks, now I'm going to take on a project this week that is going to be just for me, just for fun. It's a very interesting build. It's something that I have never really run into historically speaking. It's a bit of an oddity, and it probably has a bit of a niche in history, a small window in history. Today what I'll be making is something called a Cestus or a Cestus or a Cestus. I'm not certain exactly the pronunciation of it. Essentially it was basically a gauntlet or brass knuckles for gladiators, both Roman and for Greek. So without further ado, let's get to the shop and get started. About a month ago, I was looking around on the computer, just messing around, looking at images, historical images of things that interest me, fantastical images of things that interest me, and I came across the following image of what is called a cestus. I actually think that the correct pronunciation is a Cestus. I'm not certain of that, but it is essentially a boxing glove or a battle glove used by the ancient and Greek Roman boxers and gladiators. It comes from the word kestos, which means band or tie, but it's got a lot of derivatives. It also, the Spanish word cesto means basket, and it also can mean an enclosure or something that holds on to something. The Roman design, the Roman variant that I saw was based on a Greek design that was essentially just leather strips, and they were called hemantes or spherae to protect the fist and the lower arm. Later versions, the cestus it was essentially a weapon. It was covered with knots, with studs, with all pieces of metal, and sometimes fitted with spikes to potentially cause lethal injuries. But the image that I saw, the first image that I'm showing you here, really is what captured my mind. It looks like to me that there's a metal plate that wraps around the fist, and as well as a metal plate that comes off the top in the form of a blade almost. Very intriguing. I decided that even though it was a primitive look, I wanted to get in and start looking at how to make this thing and how to make something that isn't very refined but useful in kind of a horrific way. I decided that I wanted to take this design, this concept, maybe a step farther, and I was going to make something that was basically going to be a gauntlet but articulated slightly so that the user could open the hand and close the hand while the fist covering, the knuckle covering would remain the same. The other thing that I decided to do, I decided that I was going to make the knuckle covering out of about 10 gauge steel, and that's just over 1/8 of an inch in thickness. So very, very thick. Certainly something that I would not be necessarily making armor out of, and I certainly haven't in the past. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge. I was going to have to use a lot of heat and a lot of hammer blows. I wanted to make this dish around the front of the knuckles, but at the same time I also wanted to make these, I would call them valleys almost, that go between the knuckles, between the fingers, giving this front plate a look of something that almost mates to, almost like a glove that would mate to the fingers and to the hand in front of it. To accomplish that, I was going to need to make some grooves that are going to go down the front face of this. And normally with a thinner gauge steel, I would just go ahead and hammer these in and start to make these grooves. But because this is a very, very thick and very hardy plate of metal, I cheated a little bit, cut in just a little bit of cuts. cut in the grooves. And the biggest reason I cut those grooves in, as you see I'm fitting the chisel to my vise here, is so that when I turn this upside down, that the chisel will nestle into that groove that I cut. Once I heat it up, I didn't want to have to look for it, find for it, hunt for it. I wanted it to fit directly in to where this chisel was going to be seated. It worked great. And honestly, heating it up and going ahead and putting it back onto that chisel worked pretty darn good. I tried a few different chisels that I have that are made to nest in the hardy hole in the anvil, and in the end I just came back to this particular one. It just seemed to do the best job. I don't normally heat what I would call plate metal or sheet metal that I'm using for hammer, but man, it makes a huge difference. You can see the fingers and the knuckles starting to form already. Lots and lots of heating, cooling, going back, putting it on my hand, taking a look at it. How does it fit? Does it nestle over my closed fist well? I like the way it came out. I thought it came out pretty darn good in that regard. Now on to making what we're going to call the blade. And to me, it's not a blade. It's not a spike. It's not a blade because it's not sharp. It's just a standoff piece of metal that has a little bit of indentations, as you see me carving in here. I didn't sharpen it. I did make the points a little bit more pointier. But in the end, I don't know if you call it a blade. It's just a bar, a piece of metal bar that's going to ride on top of the fist. The only thing I found tricky here was lining this up, because if you look at your fist directly down once you make it, the fist doesn't rest perpendicular. The face of the fist is not perpendicular to your wrist or to your arm. Your little fingers and your ring finger are going to be slightly behind the index finger and the pointer finger once you make that fist. That said, I wanted it to be able to open up cleanly and then close so that it wasn't exactly perpendicular to we'll just call it the blade that I'm going to put on top of it. Here's where I made a mistake. I have welded steel to brass before. It's never clean, and I just decided I was going to try to do that. I wanted to make this hinge, and to do so I couldn't find anything the right thickness that wasn't brass. It failed miserably. I'm just going to tell you right now. I got it to mount, but after a few test blows, it just cracked right off. So here I am with a piece of steel that I'm going to head weld to to the face of this, and then I will weld that little ringlet that you saw. I'm going to weld that directly onto this metal blade. Now what I decided to do also here is two things. I was going to put leather backing behind the fist portion, just to give it some padding, if you will. And to do that, I was going to rivet it on there. At the same time I was going to rivet this little piece of leather, I was also going to make studs, kind of like brass knuckles. I have some really large format rivets that I just thought it would be rude if I didn't put in there and give it kind of a more brutish look. I am not certain where I got this aesthetic from. I'm sure it's not original idea to me, but usually when I am mounting leather to steel in armor, for example, I will use copper rivets. I don't quite know why. There just is something that just seems a little bit better about having copper rivets when they are touching the leather. Again, don't know why, because copper corrodes over time, and it's probably not a great thing to have against the leather. I just like the aesthetic of it. And I hear my friend Jeff already lecturing me about not clamping down my metal, but in this particular instance, I needed to get a little bit creative with it because it wasn't exactly flat to the stand on the drill press. Now, I had a visitation halfway through from my daughter, and mind you, this is midday on the weekend, and here she comes wearing her jammies and a pair of shoes. So, what do you do when you see your cute little daughter wearing jammies and a pair of shoes? Well, you put her to work. Making her do the rivets here for me. She did a really good job. I actually was impressed. Putting my hand that close to her hammer blows made me pucker a little bit, but honestly, she did a great job, and we had a really good time. I have been trying as a former wrestler myself to get either of my daughters into wrestling, and they are just completely rebuking me, but this is the closest that I'll ever probably come to seeing her do any form of self-defense or combat sports. I was going to use cordage to wrap around 2 of the fingers once you get this over the top of your hand, so that when it articulates you can move it in 2 directions. And to do that I needed to take these really large format rivets that you see here and make little studs out of them, drill some holes in them to take the cordage through. And before I sent her along her way, I said, we need a little dance break. Come on, show me what you're working with. She's still of that age where she'll dance or sing around me and she doesn't get embarrassed or self-conscious, which I'm going to milk that until I possibly can't milk it any farther. And then the little hellion stole my camera. I am fast at work doing God's work, doing the hardest stuff here, and she takes the camera and just marches across the field to go look at the video of the dog. The camera angle's wrong, the lighting's wrong. She probably clunks it on the railing here, but who am I to lecture her on this? After I get the cordage attached and to my liking, the last piece that I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's basically going to be a leather brace. It's going to go over my wrist. It's going to be about 4 inches in length, so it's going to have to taper a little bit. But I want the back end of that blade to rest on something and to attach directly to something. So for the example, and again, this is a little gruesome, but if you were to hit something with that, you don't want it to move back on your hand. You want it to be attached to something that is close to your wrist. The only downside I discovered with this is how to lace up something on one of your wrists using one hand. That to me was it proved quite difficult. So it's a design flaw that I don't think that I would capture again. I do know that Romans and Greeks, they had buckles, and I could have put a buckle on that, but I'm thinking this is very primitive. It's for a gladiator. It's not fancy. It's not refined. So just having it lace up like that was what I chose to do. And then I have these really large format copper rivets, and I really like them. I have yet to use them in anything, but this was, I thought, the perfect example of where to put these. And here it is in all its brutal form and function. Very, very, very interesting implement. As you can see, the blade portion, I distressed it. I wanted to put hack marks into it, chop marks into it, other indentations as if it were used, which is just part of my aesthetic, but extremely functional. It felt very formidable in my hand. It felt like it was something that would do a lot of damage. Wouldn't give you much protection, but that's probably not what it was used for. I thought it was a fun case study. I'm glad I made this.
Thank you for joining me for that. This was really fun. It was a very quick build, very interesting build. As I mentioned earlier, what I was looking to do was make something that's between a gauntlet and brass knuckles, or those wraps that you see on boxers' hands. I strongly suspect that the image that I found of this implement where they showed this particular blade on top, I strongly suspect that it was just a blade that was wrapped over and over with leather cords to fasten it to the hand, just like a boxer's wrap would be in front of the knuckles. I have seen some pictures where there is some sort of studs or metal pieces on the front of the fist. The fascination that I had with something that I was looking to make would be something that I could use like the Cestus, but also something that opened up so that you could actually wield the weapon or hold an implement at the same time, not something completely fixed. I also didn't want to make anything that was simply leather cords wrapped around the hand or wrapped around this. I wanted something that was more of a brace on the hand. Ideally, I think I would like to see more leather here, maybe something going across the palm there that you can hold on to, but I guess you could call this more of a proof of concept than anything else. The only real learning here is something I already knew, which is you can't MIG weld brass or bronze the way that you do steel. That utterly failed, but I knew that was going to fail. Outside, even though it's nearly June, we're having a snow squall pouring through, the wind's ripping through, so I'm going to record this inside. All in all, an extremely brutish, semi-grotesque weapon or piece of protection. Very primitive in nature, but under the right or wrong circumstances, this would definitely leave an impression on someone's mind if you got hit with it. So that's it. Thank you for joining me for this short build. If you like fantastical creations, recreations, whimsical projects or endeavors, check out the rest of my channel for builds like this and other things that I get interested in along the way. Thinking of that, next week, I'm really excited. A good friend of mine has approached me to make him an axe. And it's not just any axe. It's an axe essentially for the zombie apocalypse, the end of times, when everything goes to hell in a handbasket. That's the type of axe he wanted. Come join me next week for that build. I look forward to it. Until then, God bless.